Kia ora, I'm John Fallett, Chief Executive at Water New Zealand. Over the past couple of years, our association's been keeping a close eye on developments for the establishment of a new drinking water regulator in New Zealand. And over the next few minutes, Leslie Smith, a data scientist who works here at the association, and Jim Graham, our Chief Water Quality Scientist, will be talking to you about some of the detail of those proposals.
Kia ora, Jim. So we've got the final cabinet papers about setting up the new drinking water regulator. What do you see as the main points that everybody needs to know about?
Kia ora, Leslie. I think there's probably about a half a dozen things that are important here. The first is that the new organisation will be a standalone Crown agency. So it's not going to be a part of another government department. It'll be a separate standalone organisation with a high level of independence. I guess one of the other things is that it'll have its own governance board. So it'll have a board that provides governance over the whole organisation. The third thing that I thought was particularly interesting was the Cabinet paper outlined a very strong commitment to Te Mana o Te Wai. And that's important in terms of the way that the organisation will view water and the way it'll advance a lot of ideas about how water should be protected and looked after. It'll have a Maori advisory group supporting both the board and the organisation. So it'll be very different to what we've had. It'll have extensive capabilities and it'll provide a lot of assistance to water supplies. And the Cabinet paper indicated that ultimately it could employ up to 150 people.
Yeah, okay, that's really big. And so what about the setup? I understand that we're expecting the regulator's going to be established through Acts of Parliament. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, there's going to be two specific Acts of Parliament bills that will go through the House. The first is establishment legislation, and that Act will put in place all the things that are needed to get the new regulator established. Along with that, there's another piece of legislation, the Water Services Bill, and that will outline the functions and the powers of drinking water assessors and of the organisation. And so that'll be more about the operation of how it does things. And so we expect to see that legislation hopefully introduced to the House before Christmas, and the intention is that it would be passed sometime later next year.
Okay, so the actual regulator itself won't be able to operate until the legislation is passed?
That's correct. We have to wait until the legislation passes for the regulator to have the authority to do the things it needs to do. But the Department of Internal Affairs is setting up an establishment unit, and that unit will put in place all of the measures needed. It'll find a building to house the organisation. It'll look at the roles, the functions, how it's going to operate, all those kind of things. So that establishment unit will be set up early next year, and it'll put things in place so that when the legislation passes, the new organisation can get on with the job.
Right, which does sound like a big job. What do we know about the costs and the timing of things?
So it's expected it'll be 18 months to set up and get going. It's a big job, so it's not surprising it'll take that long. And the Cabinet paper has set aside $8.5 million to do that.
Right, it's big.
It's big, and there's a lot going on. So the establishment unit will determine the details of the new regulatory organisation, but the Cabinet paper suggested that it will have 6 main groups. A large regulatory group is proposed, with possibly up to 70 people, mostly drinking water assessors. The tasks of that group are likely to be assessing standards compliance and assessing water safety plans, maintaining a register of supplies and issuing compliance orders, that kind of thing. But most importantly, responding to drinking water incidents and emergencies. An operational policy group is also proposed, which would be responsible for the preparation of standards and documents. It is expected to have responsibility for accreditation and licensing of water suppliers and operators. It would also monitor sector performance for the drinking water, wastewater and stormwater sectors. A science and technical group is proposed, which will support the work that the organisation does. It would facilitate and drive drinking water science in New Zealand and keep up to date with international developments. An education and engagement group is also proposed there will be a need for considerable internal and external education and training for the sector. And of course, the organisation will need IT and HR support, so a corporate and governance group will also be required.
So what we've discussed so far does sound like a massive task, pulling the whole thing together, but was there anything in the Cabinet paper that surprised you?
I was very interested to see the creation of the position of Chief Drinking Water Inspector. So that's a statutory position, a bit like the position of Director of Public Health. And that is a very important position, and a position with a lot of authority, which will be involved in ensuring compliance with the drinking water standards.
Okay. And then I guess the big question is, what does this mean for water suppliers, for the people that work in our sector? Do you think that we should be worried?
I don't think people should be concerned about what's going to happen, but I think they'll need to engage with it as much as they possibly can. There won't be a lot of change initially, but in time, and probably starting in 18 months, there will be considerable change. I think that water suppliers will need to be prepared for these changes, and they'll find that the new organisation is more active, far more knowledgeable, and far more involved in assisting and helping water suppliers achieve drinking water supplies compliance. I'm hopeful that the organisation will provide the very much needed leadership that's been missing from the drinking water sector, and that was highlighted by the inquiry into the Havelock North. So my view is the industry needs to get behind the new regulator, they need to support it, they need to engage with it, and they need to make it work for the betterment of all of the industry. And I think that's what everybody wants.
And where to from here? How can people keep in touch? How do they hear what's going on? How do they feed information back and keep a part of the process themselves?
So Water New Zealand will continue to talk with government and to talk with government officials, and we'll put forward the views of the industry. That's important. And the other thing we'll do is we'll make sure that the industry and our members are kept informed. We'll continue to engage, tell people what's happening, and you can watch our website, and hopefully we'll do more videos like this. It's important that people get behind the new regulator. It's important that we make it work. It's for in the best interests of the industry. It's unprecedented times, it's a big change, and it's very exciting. So I'm looking forward to what's going to happen next year.
Okay, thank you, Jim. That is exciting indeed, and we'll be hoping to hear from people, the Water New Zealand Fora, Water Service Managers Group, Water Utilities Association. We've got a whole host of different ways to get in touch from us, and we'll be really hoping to hear from people.
So there we have it. Jim and Leslie have covered off the high points of what's going to be in the proposed legislation. But just remember that the legislation is yet to go through the parliamentary process, and it's likely that there could be some changes. But about this time next year, we should have a final piece of legislation enacted. In the meantime, if you've got any questions, you can ask the association, contact us to talk about them, and thanks for watching.